terms of the book, Joseph, when I know we spoke maybe a couple of years ago, 2 years ago when I started this podcast, and we spoke about the upgraded or updated, sorry, not upgraded, updated version of the Spielberg biography that you've done. When
Mhm.
did when in general, how long does it take you to write a book? And maybe use this as an example in terms of research, if you've had that over the last 50 years. And what's the process of doing that? Like, how do you sort of go about, working
Yeah.
on a book, if you can talk about that?
Yeah, I've been writing books since 1963 when I was a teenager. I wrote a book on baseball in my teenage years. So I've been doing it continuously. But, as I mentioned, the 50-year thing, I often take a long gestation period like that to kind of mull over things. I mean, I get interested in some filmmaker, and I mean, John Ford, for example, I wrote two books on, one with Michael Willington, who's died a few years ago, but he and I wrote a book, a critical study on Ford in the 70s, and then I did a biography. And it took about 30 years off and on work to get the biography done. Um, it takes a long time. And with Cukor, the first thing I wrote on him was 1971. I wrote a review of another Cukor book, and I talked about how difficult it is to evoke the texture and the minute by minute or second by second nuances of the acting in his films. And how do you do that? And I mean, one way that it's easier now is you can use good frame enlargements. I have 91 photographs in this book, George Cukor's
Mm-hmm.
people, and I have pictures of Cukor working with the actors, but I also have carefully chosen frame enlargements of moments that I write about or scenes that I write about. So that helps one describe it, but you need the language to describe the texture and the climate that he created. I got a start on this in 1973. I wrote an essay for Film Comment on Lowell Sherman's performance in What Price Hollywood, which is a marvelous 1932 film. It's kind of the rough draft for the Star is Born cycle. This one is about a alcoholic director who winds up destroying himself, but he's altruistically helping a young actress become a star. And Cukor was offered the 1937 Star is Born by David O. Selznick, for whom he made What Price Hollywood, but he felt he, was too close to it, had already done it. But he wound up directing the 1954 version with Judy Garland and James Mason, which I think is Cukor's best film. But I wrote a piece on Lowell Sherman, who's a kind of forgotten actor, but he was a good stage and film actor. For example, he played the cad who seduces Lillian Gish in D.W. Griffith's what Way Down East in 1920. And so I started watching some of his films in Madison, where I was going to school. We had the RKO collection, and so I got to see some of the rare films. He directed 13 films, Lowell Sherman. So he's one reason that film is so good is he was a real director, and so it made the film very authentic. Because unlike most films about filmmaking, Truffaut's Day for Night is another exception. They don't show the process very authentically, but Cukor and Sherman worked well together. And well, I studied the films that Sherman directed, and he was a good director. He directed Katharine Hepburn to her first Oscar in Morning Glory in 1933, and he directed Mae West in She Done Him Wrong. And he died prematurely of a heart attack while he was filming Becky Sharp, which was the first three strip Technicolor film. But so I analyzed his performance in detail, and then when I began thinking about doing this book, I kind of looked back at that essay and I thought this is the way to go. And over the years, I had learned a lot about acting, I think, because most importantly, Orson Welles put me into The Other Side of the Wind, his film about Hollywood in 1970 through 76. I acted for him for more than 5 years. And I was not an actor, but he liked working sometimes with non-actors. He could mold their performances, and I was putty in his hands and just kind of let him guide me. And He was another one of the greatest actors, directors in cinema. And I also watched him directing all different kinds of people, Oscar winners and younger actors, and John Huston, his peer, wonderful performance. And I was on the sets of lots of films in those days as a variety reporter. I got to watch a lot of directors and stars working together. And I also reviewed a lot of not only films, but plays. I was a second string play reviewer on Variety. So, I studied acting a lot through the various media, that I was covering. And I tried again to write about Cukor about 25 years ago, and I didn't quite feel I had it yet. But so I laid out the idea of doing this book for Columbia University Press, for whom I did books on Billy Wilder and Ernst Lubitsch, and John Belton, excellent film scholar, film historian, was my editor, and Philip Leventhal, and they were very supportive. And I found it easier to do than I thought. I was a little worried that I wouldn't quite have the vocabulary, but I found that I could describe the performances clearly. The trick is to do it with real physical details, and I was a screenwriter too. And when I've taught screenwriting, I tell people, be very specific, give physical details. For example, I used to write the American Film Institute Life Achievement Award shows with the producer, George Stevens Jr. And I got to work with all kinds of big stars from the golden age of Hollywood, and it was really a wonderful experience that a young screenwriter usually wouldn't have. And I rehearsed with them, but I was a little naive when I started in 1980. I asked George, I said, how does this work? Do they come in with speeches, or what happens? And he laughed. He said, Joe, these are actors. They need a speech written for them. They need writing. Actors are kind of panicky without. I remember I worked
Direction.
with Eva Marie Saint, Academy Award-winning actress, still with us, terrific actress. On our tribute to Lillian Gish, Eva Marie Saint had acted with her on the stage and on television, and through it's a long story, but we didn't get to cast the show until kind of the last minute, and I was hurrying to write speeches for people, and I got a phone call like 2 days before we were about to do the show. And this man, he didn't identify himself, but I knew immediately that he was Eva Marie Saint's husband, Jeffrey Hayden, who was the director. He said, Miss Saint is really nervous. She needs a speech. Where's her speech? You got to write this speech. And I said, well, I'm sorry, I've been working on all kinds of speeches. And he said, she's got to have this speech, And so I said, I'll drop everything and, I'll send it to you in half an hour. So I sat down and I had a notebook of 100 pages, single-spaced notes of things that people could say that I had collected in my research. And I quickly found a good story for her to tell. And I wrote it up in half an hour and faxed it over. And Mr. Hayden called up and said, she loves the speech. Thank you very much. And he never identified himself, and I just said, yeah, thank you. He was watching out for his wife, and so she did a wonderful job on the show. It was a really beautiful rendition of
Yeah.
that. But so that really helped to work with actors and know what they needed and how we could bring out the best in them. So when I sat work on this book on Cukor, what I did was watched all the films repeatedly again and over and over and over. That's what you do. And took detailed notes and real specific notes, and then tried to figure out what were the most important scenes I wanted to write about. And then also Cukor was also distinguished because he had great respect for the text. He always called it the text. And he would carry around script pages with him when he directed. And by the end of the day, they'd be all mangled up. But he was, unlike most directors then and now, he was very respectful of writers. As a matter of fact, I'm a member of the Writers Guild of America, and we gave him an award late in his life for his respect for writers, which is, as far as I know, unique. award. I mean, the idea of the Writers Guild giving a director an award, and he was so happy to do that. But he treated his he often got the best plays, usually plays, to adapt, and then he would work with the screenwriters. He had the best screenwriters, Donald Ogden Stewart and Jane Murfin, Anita Luz, Ruth Gordon, Garson Kanin. That Gordon and Kanin wrote original scripts for him. But he wasn't a writer. He didn't try to be a writer. And if he needed lines, to augment what he was doing, he would call Gordon and Kanin on the phone in Connecticut and say, we need a few lines here for Spencer Tracy. And they'd call back half an hour later with the lines. And that was really unusual. And so I would study these plays and the scripts and other materials and find out how he turned these into cinema, which he did so beautifully.